Okay, gang. So I mentioned in the to-do that you need to have a map of the German unification in front of you because I am technologically not savvy. I'm getting there though. Anyway, so get that map in front of you here. If you have to pause it and move forward, go for it here. Um, so I think in a previous audio, video, something, I was telling you about Prussia and how Prussia became this mighty army, militarily strength in Europe. Remember, I think I said since it was a part of the Holy Roman Empire that it was actually viewed as the sandbox because the property in Prussia was really not worth a whole lot. It didn't hold a lot of appeal for a lot of people. And so it just was never a territory that people took or wanted to take, like Poland. So whenever you had wars being fought between East and West or North and South, Prussia was just stomped through. And as a result, as you move generations upon generations upon generations of this, they grew up being very defensive of their territory. They grew up being very militarily ready to defend their territory. So Prussia had developed a very nice army even before we get into this German unification here. The army was not necessarily voluntary, but it had been arranged a certain way. Anyway, moving into the quote unquote modern times here, when we hit to around 1850s, basically you had this country of Prussia, which is in the green there, or at least in my map it's green, but it's Brandenburg, Prussia. You had the West and the East Prussia, And what you were looking at is Prussian leadership. King William was looking around and realizing that they were no longer, that they were going to have to step up their game if they wanted to be a player in Europe. Basically, they had seen empires come and go, but they also knew that they were vulnerable in a sense. It didn't matter that they had a pretty strong military. The rest of the world was catching up with them. And so King William, I think he was King William I, decided that he needed to up the game militarily and wanted a stronger, bigger army. Unfortunately, he met resistance with the aristocracy of Prussia, who really didn't want anything to do with that at all. Armies cost money. Where do you get money from? It's from the wealthier people. They wanted no part of it. And so the king decided to pull in somebody as his prime minister who would bridge the gap between what he wanted and what the aristocracy didn't want. And that would be Otto von Bismarck, who was an aristocrat, but he was also somebody who kind of had the worldview that King William held, which was, if we're going to stay a player in Europe, we have to up our game. Anyway, what makes Bismarck pretty interesting is that it's not so much a military thing as much as a politically savvy dude. Bismarck played this very well, and politically, you've got to give him some massive kudos for it. Okay, so if you look on your map there and you look up towards the top, you should be able to see Denmark, or at least a portion of Denmark. And then underneath Denmark, you should see something called Schleswig and Holstein, which, by the way, I don't have a European accent. I've never been to Europe, really. So if I say Schleswig like this, it's with an Okie accent, and you're going to get over it. Anyway, so if you look down below there, those were two territories that were part of the German Confederation. They were loose territories of the German Confederation. They were not strong. They were not that terribly important. I mean, I don't know much about them, but they were obviously very loosely connected because Denmark just announced one day, hey, I'm going to take these two countries and make them part of Denmark. So when that occurred, Bismarck basically pounced, realizing that this was his opportunity to begin to expand the need for Prussia's military to get bigger. See, the problem was that you have to convince the aristocracy who have the money to fund this military, right? And you have to convince everybody that they want to join the military and make Prussia big and strong. And so what better way to do it than to say, oh my gosh, look at what Denmark just did. Denmark just took two territories out of the Confederation. And if you look, it's right between all of Prussia. And do you know what's going to happen, dear Prussian people? Well, what's going to happen is that Denmark will get cocky and then decide to take more territories, including us. We need to stop it. And so Bismarck got Prussia to declare war upon Denmark, which, is not that big of a deal, really. But here's the politics part of it all. Bismarck then turned down to Austria. And, the Austrian Empire is the remnants of the old Holy Roman Empire, right? And so Austria used to be big as the Holy Roman Empire and then had been shrinking and shrinking throughout, these centuries, right? And so what we've got here is we've got this rising empire of Austria proper, and that Austria-Hungary or the Austro-Hungarian Empire, whatever you want to call it, I just say Austria, is looking to make a name for themselves. And if you recall the Austrian / Holy Roman Empire used to quote unquote rule over the German states. So even though everything's very loose now that there's no Holy Roman Empire, basically what Bismarck did was he turned to Austria and said, hey, Austria, did you just see what Denmark did? And you realize that they're going to try to take more of the German states, which, you kind of control, don't you? And Austria's like, well, we don't really control the German states, but we really kind of watch over them. And you're right. Darn you, Denmark. Well, we'll help you go to war with Denmark. So look at that. So Bismarck pulled Austria in on the side of Prussia. The two of them together beat Denmark. It wasn't that hard. And because they worked together on it, then they were able to share the spoils of war, which was, again, Schleswig and Holstein. Well, Bismarck did that purposely, and I need you to understand that. He did that purposely because he needed to have a reason to get Austria on the other side, to make an enemy of Austria, sort of. And so there they were, going to share these two territories here, share governance of it all, which in effect sort of meant that down the road, maybe they could share all of the German states. Anyway, so point here is that as Bismarck's not really working with Austria to jointly own these territories, but then decides sort of that maybe they would be better belonging to Prussia, since if you look at the map, they're kind of right there with Prussia. So what he does, and again, politically savvy here, basically he turns to Russia and says, hey, Russia, you hate Austria, right? And Russia's like, well, we always have. And then he turns down to Italy, which is way down there, not even on your maps here, and basically says to Italy, hey, Prussia here, if you will back us up against Austria, then we will give you some territory down there that used to belong to you that Austria took. But kind of just be on our side, okay? And Italy, who's just now unifying too, was like, thumbs up, dude. And then the same thing with France, basically. Basically, Prussia turned to France. Bismarck himself turned to France and said, dude, you hate Austria, right? And of course, France is like, sure, whatever. And at that point, Bismarck pounced and managed to get, I forget how, it's in your book, but got Austria to declare war. That's key. You never want to be the person to declare war. You want them to declare war upon you. It's all about politics, people. In any case, as you can read in your book here, essentially the Prussian army, which was ready to go and had always been a strong army, was now pretty good and marched into Austria essentially and just more or less slaughtered Austria, to the point that Austria said, fine, we give, what do you want? And Prussia at that point then said, we want all of these northern German states to be a part of us, and we will be this giant Prussia. Now, why they didn't ask for all of the German states has to actually do with German politics. And understand when I'm saying German, there is no Germany, okay? These are all, there was up to 300 little kingdoms, remember here, that have now, I think at the time of unification, there's like 39-ish, little states, basically. And the politics and the religion of the northern German states was somewhat different than the ones on the southern states. And it has everything to do with geography and who your neighbors are. So when Bismarck was looking at what he could control, it was the northern ones, because obviously they were connected to Prussia in one way or another. And he left the southern ones to be on their own rather than force them into Prussia and make them angry and have to deal with that. He figured he would do this a whole other way. And so essentially here, he wanted the southern states to join up with Prussia, but he wanted it to be done sort of voluntarily. And so in the end, what happened was Bismarck instigated war with France, who, well, I wish I could tell you nobody loves France, and I wish I could tell you nobody loved the German states, but the truth of it was that France, being a big country, was kind of dominating of the southern German states. And Bismarck had used that to his advantage to basically look at the southern states and go, you know what, here you have an option. You can be a part of France or you can be a part of us, and let's go to war with France. We're going to war with France because we don't want you to join them and become French. Anyway, in the end of the Franco-Prussian War, which ended in 1871, with Prussia winning, the German southern states joined Prussia, and they formed the borders of basically what we know as Germany today. And there you have our brand new country of Germany. I would tell you that, your book's going to talk about the Italian unification and blah, blah, blah. But I'm focusing on Germany because obviously in the 20th century, we deal with Germany a couple big times, right? But on the bigger scale for this chapter, what I'm pointing this out for is that what Bismarck did here was not so much create a country as much as he did was create a culture. He created a people that had once been like 300 separate groups of people have now, at 1871 forward, are going to begin calling themselves simply Germans, and that they are connected to each other by all these various little areas, but they will begin identifying themselves as true German with a country of Germany. And there will be pride in that. And Bismarck is very integral to that pride of being German, that nationalism, by saying essentially here, we could have folded, we could have been taken over, but look at us joining together to become one people that we can stand up to all the bullies in Europe and move forward. And why this is such a big deal is that, like I said, this is one of the factors leading into World War I in 1914. So this is 1871. And between 71 and 1914, not only has Italy has unified, Germany has now unified. And for Germany in particular, they're looking to make a name for themselves. They're a brand new newborn country. They have nothing to show for themselves except for a pretty good sized army. And if you want the neighborhood to take you seriously, you have to prove it. And so Germany spends the years between 1871 and 1914 basically building up everything that they can, modernizing as quickly as they can so that they can become a major player in Europe. But again, they don't do it with okay, everybody, we just have to catch up. It's we are German and we will do this and we are going to be strong and number one and we are going to dominate this continent. They really push that nationalism thing. So now if you look south of Germany and you'll get to that Austrian Empire here, even though an empire does not necessarily have just Austrians in it, the actual Austrian collection of people who are running this empire really began to push on nationalism on their end too, that they want to be, part of it. Well, if the Germans are going to be Germans, then the French have to be French again. And, basically it's a one-upping of each other in Europe as everybody begins to fully identify themselves as we're a very special country. Yes, we are. Then what will end up happening is as the Ottoman Empire crumbles and you will see south of Austria into the Balkans region, Greece, Turkey area, you will begin to see these little countries who have freed themselves from the Ottoman Empire working to become their own nations, their own countries. And that nationalism, that spirit of nationalism that has come out of Germany here and is sweeping through Europe is also going to sweep into these areas where you have brand new baby countries again wanting to stand on their own feet and become, for example, a Serbia, for example, a Bosnia, for example, a Romania, countries that, that maybe did not exist before, but these people are now able to say, we're going to create our own country and we will fight to the death for it. And so that's the purpose of this chapter here on nationalism, is to get you to understand that, World War I was not fought simply because an archduke was killed. It has a lot to do with the power play going on in Europe, especially when you get one country that goes, seriously, stop and think about the date here. If Bismarck came in 1862 and in 1871, the new country of Germany was established, that is 9 years. And for 39 little kingdoms sort of to go from being 39 little separate things that were overlooked by Prussia and Austria to all of a sudden becoming this pretty large country in the middle of Europe. And not only that, they are going to begin from 1871 forward, moving at a rapid pace towards, industrializing and catching up with the rest of them. That sends everybody into a flurry of, oh, we have to do this too. Oh, we have to be aware of that. We have to watch them. Look at how fast they're growing. Look at how big they're getting. We need to do that too. And that nationalism there was alarming. Western Europe has always been dominated by England, France, and Spain. And to all of a sudden have this country pop up out of almost nowhere. And not only did they pop up, but they are catching up. They are getting bigger. They are getting stronger. They are playing the game savvy. It scared the bejesus out of a lot of people. And when we reach that 1914 mark, and an archduke does get shot, there's all these factors that lead into the war, and this is one of the big ones. So that is why we are talking about German nationalism here. Bingo.